Hello and welcome to this download from Blackwell Online. My name is George Miller, and my guest today is biographer and novelist Rodge Glass. Rodge first met Alasdair Gray, the subject of his new biography, when Gray visited the pub where Rodge was working while still a student in Glasgow. Despite stumbling beginnings, when Rodge was overawed by Gray's literary reputation, his novel Lanark, after all, does appear in many lists of the best post-war novels in the English language. He went on to become Gray's student, his friend, secretary, and eventually biographer. Much of the book's charm derives from the fact that Glass eschews the usual biographer's tone of impersonal omniscience. Glass is a participant in Gray's life, a character in his book, frank and funny about Gray's and his own flaws and foibles, a Boswell to Gray's Johnson. I asked him about the origins of this unusual strategy.
I'd always kept diary entries because things were continually happening with Alasdair that I felt that I wanted to record anyway. But it became increasingly obvious as I was going on in the process that what I was trying to do and what I thought I could give that somebody in the future or that doesn't know Alasdair so well can't give is access to what it's like to be in a room with him. It's a remarkable personality, maddening and peculiar in many ways and full of tics, but fascinating. And I really think that Alasdair Gray fans in 100 years are going to want to know what he was like to stand with. So I thought, right, okay, this is how I should do this. I should do a diary entry about watching him paint, or about watching him do events, readings, taking questions, publicising his latest novel, visiting him in hospital, driving him to a friend's funeral. These are the things where you can see the human being in a way that you can't when you're saying, and in 1992, Poor Things was published, and it was received like this. So what I then had was these two strands going decade by decade in his life in a very traditional academic way, and analysing the work in depth and praising some of it and criticising others, and using the interviews that I'd done to embellish those, and also interviews with Alasdair. And then this other half, which was like the light relief in between all of the hard work of reading about, his obscure poetry from the late 1980s that didn't do very well. I felt the balance between those two things was really important.
Some of those scenes, as you say, have a sort of rich, absurd comedy to them. There's a moment where I think you're taking dictation and he gets up and urinates in the sink, which stuck in my mind.
It stuck in my mind as well. Although it was at that moment I thought, yes, here is a man who deserves my respect. But that was because he didn't pause in the dictation at the time. He, whilst urinating, continued to dictate the letter that he'd been dictating. So I think I say in the book, I don't think I ever washed my hands in that sink again, but I certainly thought, yes, here's a man who deserves my respect.
You're a novelist. I wondered how you did justice to the character that is Alasdair Gray, or how you approached the question of doing justice to him without him becoming a caricature, because obviously there's a risk of that. I mean, you could simply fill a book full of anecdotes like that one. So how did you maintain his sort of reality and humanity at the same time as having this fund of stories that you could have simply regaled us with in those light and shade passages?
There definitely could have been another 100,000 words of pissing stories or fart stories, and that would have made him a caricature. But by spending any deal of time with Alasdair, it's very obvious that his personality has many, many other deeper facets to it, and that he's not ignorant of the way that people see him. He's not stupid. So in fact, the opposite. The book argues that he's a great mind. So over the years, he's refined some of those personality tics in order to be able to get what he wants out of people as well, as anybody would do. And what I tried to do is to explore those darker sides as well in order to do him justice. That's more difficult for our relationship in general now, and I suppose for the future, because it's difficult for Alasdair to read certain things. But I hope that I've done it in the most honest way that I can, and you have to show what he's like at his lowest, or else his highest doesn't mean anything. So I was very aware of turning him into this caricature that people would just laugh at. But there's one diary entry where I was introducing Alasdair at an event, and then interviewed a number of people in the audience afterwards about how they perceived him. And it is interesting how some do think that he is just that caricature, but he knows what people see. and plays up to that when he wants to and refuses to at other times. And if you spend a number of years with somebody paying attention, there are enough opportunities to see all of those sides, and it's an honest biographer's duty to show them all.
I think you say that interviewers, when they interview Alasdair Gray, get a sort of one-man show, and there's still that presentation of himself. And you mentioned the voices that he does, and I wondered if you felt that you had kind of, by spending so much time close to him, you had kind of gone through all those layers and got to something that you really understood behind it about what made the man tick.
I think so to some extent, but I don't pretend to have done so any more than anyone else who's known him for many years. I mean, many of the people I interviewed have known Alasdair for 30, 40, 50 years, and so I wouldn't pretend to know him as well as they do. But you certainly become aware of when certain voices are used and what that means. But it doesn't mean that Alasdair is dishonest. I mean, on the contrary, he said that he feels that he's not afraid of this biography because he's faced the worst of what he's done and said in his life, and I think that's true. He doesn't mean very often to mislead. I'm talking about more subtle subconscious things that might be going on about ways to interact with the world. Alasdair said in a self-portrait he wrote for the Saltire Society about 20 years ago, he wrote about all of those tics and honestly said, I think that I use them when I'm saying something that I really mean, but I'm afraid that people won't take seriously. There are defence mechanisms, social defence mechanisms that you sometimes see him repeating in events or in interviews or just in conversations. So I do think I've become familiar with, say, when he brings the gentleman of advancing years out of the drawer, or the wee Scotch laddie, but I don't pretend to know, to have got deeper to him than say Liz Lockhead or Eleanor Hind or any of the people that have known him all his life.